Welcome back, everybody. I'm hoping that we have most of our screens are up and open. Good deal. We will get started in about 30 seconds. So if you're filling that glass of water or cup of coffee, go ahead and finish that up. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you're not back with us yet, hopefully you can hear and you're going to jump in as soon as you come back with us. First of all, thank you for such a high quality conversation. It was a great opportunity for folks to listen to one another and reflect on what were the strengths of having that kind of conversation and what were some facilitation moves people might try differently, or how they might use data differently, how they might try to focus in conversations so that we're using the word that popped up in our group, thank you, Nikki, was granular, so that we're getting as granular as possible. And our targets are narrow and deep instead of an inch deep and a mile wide. So we're going to move on to the next section. And I want to be very clear about this. This is not the only time we're going to talk about this. As a matter of fact, the team felt it was so important that we make sure everyone has deep understanding here, that we're going to spend as much time as we need to on this, certainly into January, and whatever you tell us you need more of. So we're going to take this slow. There's no, I have to learn this today or it's never coming back around. So we just want you to use this opportunity to think deeply and do a lot of reflecting. So my hope is that you have something in front of you that you can jot notes on. As a matter of fact, if you have a paper or two or a notepad, if you want to either fold your paper in half lengthwise or just put a line down the middle, is fine. But the first question that I would like you to reflect on and jot a couple of notes for yourself is, how might a school ensure fidelity and integrity when engaged in a change initiative? So how could a school ensure fidelity and integrity? But the real question is this: what would we need to know to answer that question? I don't want you to answer that question. I want you to reflect on what it is that you need to know to be able to answer that question. So take 30 to 60 seconds and jot some ideas down for yourself. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide. What I'd like you to do with that same note-taking is, or on that same note-taking device you have, is generate a note for yourself some questions you currently have about fidelity, integrity, and change initiatives. And that can be anything, like, what's the real definition of this? Or what's the difference between this and that? Or I'm not sure what this looks like. Whatever questions you might currently have about fidelity, integrity, and change initiatives. All right, if you come up with more while we're engaged in the next section, please feel free to just jot those down for yourself. Ultimately, I would love to see and hear about those questions down the road. And if we haven't answered all those questions by the end of a couple of sessions together, then we want to make sure we know what those are so we can eventually. So please don't lose this. And check them off if you get these things answered as we move along. So if we can move on. Thank you, Lori. What I'd like us to do right now is engage in a connection to our continuous improvement work that your schools are already doing, and they do regularly. What we're going to engage in is not a new exercise, and please note I'm not using the word activity. I'm using the word exercise purposefully because that word means we're building a set of skills or muscles. So the skill or muscle set, the skill set or muscles that I'm hoping we build are an understanding of that change cycle, a deeper understanding of that change cycle. So think for a moment about what steps might you take if you wanted to improve at something, anything, not school related. Pick a hobby, something you love, something it's on your bucket list of things to learn. So Lori, if you can go to the next one, thank you. So this is actually something you may have seen before, especially if you've been involved in school improvement work in our schools in the last 5 to 10 years or so. But it's such a powerful exercise. I really think it's worthwhile using again and again. So what I'd like you to do is, if you've got a fresh sheet of paper, I doubt many of you have an index card handy, but if you do, great. If you could identify a hobby, a sport, or an activity that you enjoy participating in, that is, it's not a chore like, oh, I need to spend more time at the gym. No, that's not a chore for everyone. It is for me. But something that you really just love and you're passionate about, but you want to get better at. I love to decorate cookies. Some of you already know that, but I'm always wanting to get better at it. And there are always tricks and tips and things I want to learn. So if you could think about what thing you want to do better and answer these 5 questions and answer them not with just one single word response, but with some thought there. What would you have to do to be ready to participate in that? So if I'm using my cookie decorating example, I would need baked cookies, I would need the proper tools, I might need a video tutorial, I might need some kind of a picture of a finished product so I know what I'm working toward. Second one is what knowledge and or skills do you need? Okay, I don't really know how to use that particular decorating tip, or my frosting consistency isn't always successful, or the colors change over time. So are there some things I've got to learn about that? What opportunity would need to be present? So pretty much it can't be like at 10 o'clock at night, and it can't be in the middle of me babysitting my granddaughter. It has to be when my hands aren't hurting, because if you've ever decorated, it's a very hand muscle intensive activity. So it's got to be when my carpal tunnel isn't acting up. So what other opportunities or environmental things need to be present? I might need a coach. I might need somebody to sit next to me and teach me to do something. Number 4, how would you know if you were carrying out the activity in the way it was intended? And that's going to be different for every specific activity. And then finally, what would be the result if you were actually skilled at this activity? What would be your ultimate outcome? So please take 3 minutes or so, longer if you need. Think a bit about how would you answer those 5 questions related to a non-school activity or hobby that you would choose to improve in. If you have questions, I'd love to hear them right now. Please don't be afraid to throw those in the chat. Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I think it should look very familiar. This is not something crazy or new. Take about 60 more seconds, and wherever you end is just fine. You don't have to be completely through the end, but my request would be that you spend more time thinking than rushing to get to the end.
Diane, I'm sorry. Are you in small groups now? I had a meeting from 10 to 11. Or are you in
You're
whole
fine.
group?
We're in a
Okay.
whole group. We're doing some reflection, but we're going to jump back into a conversation in about 20 seconds.
Okay, sorry.
No, don't apologize. You're fine. It's a good segue, Janice. All right, wherever you are is just fine. This is not a wrong or right activity. It's really just to stimulate the part of your brain that's going to help us think about essential components before we can jump into some kind of a change initiative. So I'm going to do this. If your first name begins anywhere from A to H, if you could answer the first question in the chat. What would you have to do to be ready to participate in whatever activity or hobby you are looking to improve in? Just throw one of your ideas into the chat. What would you have to do to be ready?
Sorry, was that first name or last name?
First name. Desired outcomes. And it's okay if you don't get that perfect. I'm not really worried about it. The exemplars. Training equipment and practice. Computer, goals, video, time. Prioritize, see it modeled. Set aside time for sure. Thanks, Greg. Dan, what are you looking to be improved in? I can't tell. All right. So if you are, if your first name begins with H through L, M, if you could answer the second question, throw it in there quick, brief. What knowledge and or skill sets would you need? Open-minded. Thanks, Donnie. Basics. Somebody's baking bread. Proper form. So you want to have some kind of target, some kind of understanding of what it is that makes that thing happen well. Fundamentals, you got to know the basics. Right. Wheel throwing, perfect. If your first name begins with N through M or N through O, no, let's do longer. P through P, no, let's say Q because I'm pretty sure nobody's got Q first names. What opportunity would you have, would there need to be present? What opportunities would you require? Is it possible we don't have anybody who's, oh, there we go. Basic knowledge. So how about 4? If we have people whose names begin with R, S, and T, how would you know if you were carrying out this activity in the way it was intended? How would you know how close or far away you were from the intended outcome? Joy and satisfaction, move from an adjustment to the regular. If you actually get to do it and not just learn about it, you're successful. Positive feedback from observers. All right, so this one I'm going to open up to anybody, obviously the last part of the alphabet, but anybody else, everyone else, I hope. What would be the result if you were skilled at that activity? What would the outcome or result be if you actually did steps 1 through 4 and you nailed it? Growth. I'm going to guess you mean measurable growth. Guitar, singing, open mic night, gardens growing, peace and health. Would not need help or support from other people, could teach someone, personal satisfaction, lead a class, actually produce fresh vegetables, better endorphins, could achieve what you were striving for, sewing projects that you could gift, so actual product. Great, thank you. If anybody wants to throw something else in, that's super, but not a requirement. I love the responses. Thank you all so much for sharing. And if we could go on to the next slide. What we want to talk about right now are how we move from that great conversation that Lori led and this idea of looking at our data and how we shift that from here's something we need to improve to here's how you're going to do that improvement in a supported manner. So traditional school change initiatives have been, I'm going to go way back. Our M-STEP scores are low, or our MEP scores are low. What do we need to do? Oh, we need to have Fraction Fridays. Okay, everybody do Fraction Fridays. And then we get to May and say, oh, we didn't change our fractions very much, our achievement in fractions very much, because we're missing that essential middle step. And it's that steps 2, 3, and 4 that we identified on that if we're going to change or improve at something. We need to have a very clear target. We probably need some help learning how to achieve that target. And then we need to measure, are we getting closer or farther away from that? We need feedback from other people. And then we need to see, did we get to where we wanted to go? Can we actually produce that outcome? So the tool that we use in the Hill model is something our cohort A people are familiar with, but as we shared in my small breakout group earlier, we have been developing an understanding of that over time. That's not something that that everybody landed on all at the same time, that we completely integrated into our tools, our skill sets to share with our teams. So the critical phases, or the critical features of phase 3 are aligning the growth target for our desired outcome. So again, if we're looking at our hobby, being very clear about what that outcome should be, and then working backward. The school establishes and aligns classroom, leadership, and school-wide support priority growth targets. So those are based on data. And the way we communicate that to the whole staff is by developing a gold standard implementation guide for classroom priority growth targets. It's not designed for adult growth targets. It's designed to tackle the student growth targets. What may result is that we establish some adult growth targets as well, because if we say we're going to get better at X, and to do that, teachers and leaders need to do Y and Z, that may tell us we've got to grow in some areas that we aren't typically gifted in. Otherwise, our students probably would have been doing better than the achievement data is showing. So we're going to start with our student growth targets. Always start with the kiddo first. That's the center of the nesting doll. And develop that gold standard implementation guide, identifying critical features What are the critical features for students and the vital behaviors teachers need to implement the evidence-based classroom practice? So we're going to walk through a first, like one row of a guide just as a practice together. But what I'd like you to do right now is take out your note-taking device that you're using right now, whether it's a computer or sticky notes, whatever. And I'd like you to please indicate to me, or to yourself, I'm sorry. This is so hard virtually, guys. All my best facilitation skills are not necessarily really strong in this virtual world. But what questions are spinning for you about this gold standard implementation guide? Some of you are very familiar with it. Some of you, thanks, Lori. Some of you, this is new. So please add those questions to your list of things you're reflecting on or wondering about. So you may have more questions than what that time has allowed. I'd love you to keep jotting those down because again, we're going to go back to those down the road. So we need to focus on the idea that that gold standard implementation guide provides the roadmap as schools move through this Hill process. Without it, folks don't know what it is they're supposed to do to affect the change in literacy behaviors. It is based upon existing strengths in the school. We capture that first and foremost, so we know what to build upon. And then we have to make sure we're considering what data they have in their performance profile that is pointing to a classroom priority growth edge. We can go to the next. So when school teams create a gold standard implementation guide for each classroom practice, priority growth target, they're going to articulate. And before I read this aloud to you, I'd like you to just look it over for yourself for a moment and consider when my team was in our breakout, one of the things we noticed is that the priority growth targets that were listed there were so many and they were fairly broad. And that idea of becoming more granular around this work, this priority growth standard work, is really critical. If you are too broad, folks won't know what to do. You'll have too many things to tackle at once. So the more specific this document can be, the better. So how will students experience specific research-based instructional practices? What are the critical features of that? What is specific and observable that the teacher will be engaging in? So if we did a walkthrough, could we see that teacher performing those skills or tasks? What are the integrity adaptations of the gold standard behaviors for teachers? And those are based on school context, resources, or student characteristics. And we'll talk about some examples of that in a minute. And what are the observable vital behaviors? Again, the nesting dolls, that the team who surrounds the student growth, what is it that we need to do at the teacher level, the building level, the para level, the principal level to ensure that that one little growth target gets all the support it needs from every level of the school system? And what are the observable changes we are looking to create so that our students have that opportunity to demonstrate that growth? So the next, again, I want you to notice and note, what questions are you still considering about a growth Gold Standard Implementation Guide. Thank you again, Lauren. So let's look at what does a gold standard guide look like. It can have, 70 rows or 7 rows or 2 rows. What matters is that the team who's deciding what's going to happen, whether it's your whole school or a small team, that they're engaged in fully investigating each of these columns. So the first column is language that should come straight from whatever evidence-based source you are using. For most of us, that's the essentials right now. For some of you, it can be the IES practice guides. For others, it might be a curricular resource. Could be Hattie's research.
PBIS, Diane.
Could be PBIS. It could be whatever original source or original research exists that tells us what has to be in place in the classroom for that student to improve. I just misspoke. What is it that that student needs to experience? So if we're making that up because it's comfortable or easy or it's accessible for teachers to talk about, we're probably not getting to the maximum capacity there. We really want to push that conversation using all our best facilitator moves to the point where we are only asking the team to look at evidence-based practices. Now, one of the skill sets we might need is gathering those resources together for them. Hopefully, we're building repertoire amongst the teams, this team as a whole, to help each other find those resources. The second column is it should come right from, again, I'm just going to talk about the essentials because that's a commonplace for most of us right now. Could come from the modules affiliated with those essentials. It could come from other parts of research that exist outside of the modules, or it could come from other evidence-based resources, like the IES practice guides. And then finally, that third column are the adaptations. So the adaptations should not be moving away from evidence-based. They should be saying, here's the evidence, here's what we know works for kids, and here's how it's going to look in this environment. So a typical example that I like to give is, if you say we're going to have a 90-minute block of reading, it's probably not going to be 90 contiguous minutes for kindergarten. It might be 90 contiguous minutes for 4th grade. It might be, if we have a half a day early release, it might be we do 35 or 45 minutes. So it's still focusing on the evidence-based research, but it's adapting the current reality for the specific students or the context that the students are functioning within. If recess is in the middle of your block, how is that different than if it's not? But it doesn't change what's in column 1 or in column 2. Column 1 is what does the student experience, and column 2 is what do the teachers or the teams need to do to make sure that happens for the students. And column 1 and 2 should not be the exact same language. Column 2 should be based on column 1, but they shouldn't be duplicate language. And that's often the case because until people learn more, they're not really sure what might need to go into column 2. So it's not an unusual place to be. We can go to the next one. So if you look at this student priority growth target, you can see there's like a million of them, right? And too many to have in one gold standard guide. You wouldn't ever be able to come up with enough practice. You'd have a 20-page document. So part of the discussion in our group was, how do you narrow that down? What do you use to drive or leverage? Which are the most critical growth targets to tackle first, or that are within reach of the instructional staff? What can they learn, or what are they already capable of without a year worth of training, right? So you got to start somewhere. And then if you look at the evidence-based practice, you can click a couple times there, Lori. So the first is the growth targets, and then click again for this evidence-based practice. So to find that, we're going to look at the read alouds and from the essential literacy practices. So we're going to identify the student growth target. We're going to identify the evidence-based classroom practice to achieve that growth target. We're going to describe the critical or fidelity features. We're going to describe that gold standard or vital teacher behavior. And then what are we going to collaborate around in terms of adaptations so that the team understands clearly, here's what we're going to do here, here's what we're going to do in this circumstance. So on the next one, Laura, if you click once. So we start with, obviously, this very first box. The question is, what do expert sources identify as the critical or fidelity features? So first we've got our practice. Now we go to what is the research? This should not be a short conversation. Ideally, this is a lengthy conversation that the team has maybe over many more than one meeting. And then the second place we go is right down that column. So what are the students going to experience? So if we're talking about a read aloud essential, we're going to go right to those bullets and we're going to read those bullets. Then we go to the second column. What does it mean the teacher's going to do? So if you want to read that for yourself, the teacher ensures that most texts are read aloud. Most texts that are read aloud are related to at least 2 other texts that are read aloud within a time period, so on and so forth. So the first column specifically addresses an evidence-based practice. The second column describes how the teachers are going to go about that in every classroom. The third column says, how are we going to do that? But it might look different in different classrooms, but it doesn't go away from the evidence-based practice. So what questions might you have about that? If you would like to open your mic up very quickly and ask anything. Either I'm a genius or everybody doesn't want to jump all over each other. So the driving question that we're going to have in this next breakout section is, if your team never sees that gold standard implementation guide template or an example, what steps would you need to take and what questions would you ask to get those folks to be able to answer each of those columns, to be able to fill in the blanks in those columns? But if they've never seen this, what facilitator moves, what guidance, what activities, what exercises, what conversations might you guide to get them to be able to understand and answer or fill in those blanks? Before we go to breakouts, I wonder what questions you might have. All right, either I'm fantastic or nobody wants to be brave. So I guess I would also suggest, if you do have some underlying questions, please feel free to private message me in the chat and I will respond to you. Even when you're in your breakout room, you might have a question or two. So we're going to break for, we're going to try to adjust the time, right? Let's break for 30 minutes. No, I'm going to change that. Let's break for 25 minutes because when we come back, I'd like to do just a smidge of debriefing. So we're going to break for 25 minutes. This does not
breaking. We're going in our breakout groups.
Yeah, this does not include a break this time. So we're just going to go straight to breakouts. And please feel free to either pop back into the main group or private message me on the chat, and I will be happy to answer any specific questions you might have.
Real quick before we go, Diane, there's a question from Jane. Will there be a place for us to see examples of this?
There will be eventually, but not right now. I mean, I've got the one row here, but we're not interested in looking at the perfect example right now. We will get that for you because it wouldn't be fair to ask you to do this without that. But right now, we just want you to think about what do you need to be thinking of as a facilitator? What does your team need? How might you guide those conversations? What are the most important parts of developing a gold standard implementation guide? So we will not deny you access to an example, but that's not where you need to be right now. Other questions? All right, be brave, please ask any questions you might have. All right, we'll see you back here at 11:55. Thank you.